With the new double banners coming out, I wanted to make a video of the top 4 characters that will always make your account better and make the hardest content much easier, even trivializing it in some cases. And since the double banner rerun is now a thing, it's likely that we'll see these characters more frequently. So I wanted to make this video to give people a heads up in case we see some or several of these characters in future patches. Hey everyone, Sharkheart here. Before we talk about the characters, I want to give you my criteria for what makes an outstanding character. It all comes down to efficiency and effectiveness. A character is worth pulling if they are an efficient use of primogems and can help you clear all the content in the game for a long time to come. In other words, these characters require the least amount of primogems but are the most effective at what they do. So that means no Constellation 6 characters or Refinement 5 weapons here. So what makes a character great and worth pulling? Here are my 5 criteria. First, they must be good at Constellation 0. Getting multiple copies of characters unlocks their constellations and can improve them dramatically. Recently, MiHoYo has been gating a lot of characters' power behind their constellations, requiring you to get multiple copies to unlock their true power. However, the characters that I'm going to talk about do not need constellations to be good and will work extremely well as soon as they come home just for the first time. After being good at Constellation 0, these characters must fulfill one or more roles really well while also being versatile. There's a lot of characters with very specific or niche roles like Toma as a shielder. However, Toma isn't very versatile. He works really well with Hu Tao, but not so great with anyone else. And Kokomi fills her role as a healer really well, but healing really isn't that important in the Genshin endgame right now. The characters I'll discuss will have the versatility to work with many different teams and situations, while also being really good at one or often multiple roles. The next criteria is that these characters will not need specific units to make them work well. A lot of characters in Genshin require other characters to maximize their potential. For example, Tartaglia. Tartaglia is a very good character, but he needs several well-built supporting characters to really show what he can do. The 4th criteria is that these characters will not need specific 5-star weapons to work well. 5-star weapons generally make any character better, but since they are very costly and hard to come by, I included this criteria as a way to help distinguish the good characters from the great ones. Many new characters are designed to have a specific weapon to maximize their capabilities, but I couldn't recommend these characters because of just how costly it is to obtain a specific 5-star weapon. And the final criteria is that these characters must be future-proof. They must be designed to handle future challenges and bring great value to your account whether you pull them tomorrow or 6 months from now. Unfortunately, there are a lot of characters in Genshin that might be good at the start of the game, but fall off really hard later in the game. For example, Qiqi can be very useful early in the game, but healing really isn't a major requirement for even the hardest content later in the game. And because Qiqi offers healing but has a whole host of other problems, she falls off pretty hard. MiHoYo literally had to introduce the new corrosion mechanic just to get people to use those characters more often, and people still didn't really use them that much. People don't fail the Abyss and the hardest content because they don't have enough healing, they fail it because they don't have enough damage. And so the characters we're going to discuss in a moment are going to be ones that you can be assured you will be using for a long time. So any investment in them will pay major dividends in the future. On this list, there are 2 4-star characters and 2 5-star characters. So we'll start with the 4-star characters first. First up, we have Bennett. To anyone who's played this game for even a little while, it's probably no surprise that Bennett is on this list. Damage, healing, buffing, energy generation, there basically isn't anything Bennett can't do. And not only is he able to do so much, but he can literally do it all really well. Strangely, Bennett is a character that is considered very unlucky in the lore and story of Genshin Impact, but he is one of the most stupidly broken good characters in the game. No one wants to be on Benny's adventure team in the story, yet everyone wants Bennett on their team for the Abyss. If you get a Bennett early on, know that he will be incredibly useful forever in Genshin Impact. While Bennett is really good at Constellation 0, Constellation 1 is an amazing constellation for him. because it allows you to receive his massive attack buff and heal at the same time. The other nice thing about Bennett is that he's rotated on the Star Glitter shop every so often. So if Bennett doesn't appear on a banner for you anytime soon, you can always wait a little while and guarantee yourself one as long as you save your Star Glitter. The next character on the list is Xingqiu. This little wet book nerd may not look like much at first, but anyone with Virgil's swords is bound to be good. Xingqiu is really good on his own, and he makes other characters really shine. He's wanted by basically every pyro character in the entire game, but also works really well in both freeze and electrocharge teams as well. And just as luck would have it, Xiangling is a free character that everyone can get, and he pairs very, very well with her too. Some people think that Xingqiu is really good because of his damage, which can be very, very strong. However, there's much more to it than that. Xingqiu is really good because he not only provides damage, but he does so off-field, meaning that you can use his elemental burst and then switch off to another character, and he also provides a lot of hydro application. This means that he's applying lots of units of hydro to enemies off-field, which is really, really good for reactions. And just for some icing on the cake with a cherry on top, he's able to reduce the damage you take and give you a little bit of modest healing as well. And again, he can do all of this when he's not even on the field, and that's why he's going to be an incredibly good unit for a long time to come. The next two characters are our 5-star characters, which hopefully will get another rerun soon. The first of these outstanding 5 stars is Ganyu. This Coca-Goat is simply one of the best and most overtuned damage dealers in the game. She can access all of her damage all of the time, and it's not gated behind any skill cooldowns like a lot of the other really good damage dealers in the game. You just point, aim, shoot, and watch her Ice Flower AoE down all the enemies from as far away as you'd like. And even though she doesn't need to rely on her skills to do great damage, her elemental burst is still amazing. It can deal absurd amounts of damage if enemies are grouped up. And without getting into the math behind it, basically her elemental burst scales quadratically, not linearly when enemies are clumped together. All this means is that when she hits 2 enemies next to each other, the damage doesn't increase by a factor of 2, but by a factor of 4. Not only that, but the AoE field is massive, so it's unlikely enemies will just run out of it like some other characters' bursts. And it's not just the damage from Ganyu's charge shots that's so impressive, it's the fact that she can hit enemies from infinity and beyond, and with AoE damage. MiHoYo keeps drastically increasing the HP of the enemies in the Abyss in such a way that new and free-to-play players will keep struggling with the upper floors. MiHoYo keeps increasing these HP pools so that players will feel more pressured to spend on characters and essentially buy the power that they need to clear the hardest content in the game consistently. However, when you have good AoE, you can drastically cut down on the amount of damage you need to do. And because Ganyu's elemental burst and charge shot deal AoE damage and can hit multiple enemies at the same time, her AoE damage is incredibly valuable for clearing current and future content. Another boon to Ganyu isn't directly related to her kit, but on the artifacts she can take advantage of. Ganyu has the ability to use the Blizzard Strayer set. Coupled with her talents, that means on a freeze team with Cryo Resonance, she needs very little crit rate and can instead be built with a ton of crit damage. So unlike other characters that are trying to get a bunch of crit rates, Ganyu can be pushed much further without having to sacrifice the consistency of critical hits, which is not something most characters can do. And remember how I said one of the criteria was these characters can't need 5-star weapons? Well, one of her best weapons is a 4-star weapon that is craftable, so you don't even need to roll for it. But you do have to get lucky with some of the prototype weapon drops from the weekly bosses if you don't have a bow prototype lying around. Another really nice thing about her, particularly later in the game, is she's a DPS that doesn't need some of the best supports like Xingqiu or Bennett to be good. This frees up a lot of opportunity to use those characters on the other side of the Abyss. And now we reached our final character. This 5-star character is so strong they might as well be a 6-star character. And that character is Venti. He was the first 5-star character introduced to the game, and still one of the most OP characters to date. Venti just trivializes a significant amount of content in this game. His burst is incredibly strong, not only because it does tons of damage, but it's also the single best CC or crowd control skill in the game, and it even has energy utility built into it. Venti's burst does good damage on its own, but it can also infuse an element and rapidly swirl, causing massive amounts of elemental damage in quick succession. Not only that, it can suck up the lighter enemies and render them helpless, while also being able to still group up some of the slightly heavier enemies. If that wasn't enough, Venti's final passive refunds 15 energy to him, essentially making his burst cost only 45 energy, and it also refunds 15 energy to any character of the corresponding element if his burst triggered that element's particular elemental absorption. While Venti's burst is the big draw to the character, his elemental skill also does good damage on a 6-second cooldown when tapped, it generates a good amount of energy, and just like his burst, it can swirl for big numbers. Venti also has a passive talent that lets you hold his elemental skill to create an updraft, allowing you to float up to harder to reach areas more easily. And with the buff to elemental mastery, Venti hits incredibly hard in an elemental mastery build. And while elemental mastery is a bit of a difficult stat to get, the advantage is you don't even need to worry about fishing for crit rate or crit damage like just about every other damage dealer in the game, because swirls can't crit. In fact, this build is so good that the Stringless, a 4-star weapon which also increases the damage of his elemental skill and burst, is so powerful on him that even most 5-star weapons can't keep up. What's even more is that Venti is a support. You don't even need to level his auto attacks to get the most out of him. In fact, Venti does so much damage that he might be the only character worth building before your main DPS because he does so much for your team. Simply press his elemental skill, then press his elemental burst, and then watch everything but the toughest monsters in the game die in a fiery, frozen, electrified, hydrolyzed, or even just uninfused black hole tornado. What's even better is that while all these other characters are good at C0, Venti's constellations barely do anything for him. You get the full benefit of his kit without being locked behind any constellations, which is not the case for most of the other characters in the game. So those are our 4 characters: Bennett, Xingqiu, Ganyu, and Venti. If I was on a fresh account, I would pull for these characters immediately whenever they came up. Not only are they incredibly good characters at Constellation 0, but they fulfill several roles very, very well. They don't need specific units to work well, they don't need 5-star weapons to work well, and they are very future-proof. Now there are a lot of good characters in this game, so I did want to give a couple honorable mentions. The first of which is Kazuha. Kazuha is a character that's slightly better than Sucrose, and he is easy to learn, but there's actually a lot of depth to master. What's more, he's a lot of fun to play, a lot more fun to play than Sucrose in my opinion. But he's not on this list because he's not stupid broken like Venti, and you do need a fairly well invested team for him to shine. But with that said, he does make any team you slot him into better. Freeze, melt, vaporize, electrocharge, even mono element teams. He's basically only bad on Zhao and Geo teams because he doesn't do anything for those particular setups. If this video was titled "The Only 5 Characters You Need to Pull For," he would definitely be a top contender for number 5 because he fulfills almost all the criteria. He's great at Constellation 0, he has a great free-to-play craftable weapon in the Iron Sting, but he can also use the Sacrificial Sword quite well. He fulfills his role as a damage amplifier really well, he can slightly group enemies and offer some amount of crowd control, and he will be useful far into the future. The only thing that holds him back is that he's not so much better from some of the other Anemo supports, namely Sucrose, that he warrants his own spot. However, he is a lot of fun to play, and definitely worth using if you have him. Our next honorable mention is Diona. Diona is a shielder, a healer, an energy battery, and she can also be a pseudo attack buffer with the Noblesse Oblige set. Diona basically does it all except deal a significant amount of damage and apply a consistent amount of cryo. She's a great utility pickup and definitely worth building if you have her. She's also a very good candidate and can utilize the Favonius Warbow that you get fairly early in the game to great effect. And while she offers a great amount of utility and support, The reason people are having trouble clearing the hardest content in the game is not because of a lack of utility, but because of a lack of damage, and unfortunately, Diana really doesn't offer that. But her ability to support some of the best damage dealers in the game does earn her an honorable mention. Our final honorable mention is Xiangling. And this might be a weird one for some people because everyone has access to a free Xiangling, but I wanted to mention this because I just want people to know that she is definitely worth building and actually outdamages most all of the other Pyro characters, 5 stars included. Xiangling's value comes from the properties on her Pyronado, which is her elemental burst. It's an elemental burst that persists when you're off the field, meaning you can switch off Xiangling after you cast it, and the effect will persist until the timer runs out. So unlike characters like Hu Tao or Yoimiya, you can actually switch off of Xiangling and continue to do a lot of pyro damage. Her elemental burst also snapshots, which means that any buff that you have on Xiangling at the start of this elemental burst's duration will persist for the entirety of the elemental burst, even if that buff disappears from the field, which, as you may have guessed it, makes her incredibly good with Bennett. And finally, her elemental burst ignores the internal cooldown rules that just about every other character in the game has to abide by. This allows Xiangling to trigger more elemental reactions and do even more damage. The reason she didn't make this list is because this video is titled the only 4 characters that you need to pull for, and you don't actually need to pull for Xiangling. Everyone gets a copy of her for free. So if you haven't built the fiery teenage master chef from Liyue, definitely consider investing in her. So what do you think of this list? Are there other characters you feel like should be included here? Let me know in the comments below. And hopefully we see these characters appear in special banners more frequently. That'll do it for this video. Thanks so much for liking and subscribing, and I can't wait to see you soon, friends. Take care.